Okay, so this is a special episode of Time Egg LP discusses because I'm fucking exhausted. I actually already had made a video excusing us from this week,
Then you
but
got bored and want to do it anyways.
I, it's less bored and more I just feel less awful when I'm doing something other than sit around feeling awful. So this rather than do a normal full length discussion and talk about the older stuff and do what we usually do with these episodes. This is just a totally off the cuff, one single question, and however long it is, it is. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 20. I don't care.
All right, what's your question?
So the question is, how do you feel about review scores for video games?
Okay.
Do you think
Are you
that
talking like just idea of a number or reviews in general?
just the idea of a numerical score, assigning a numerical score at the end of a review?
Okay. Um, I like the idea of having a short go-to. A number might be a little bit too short, but I do like to have something where I don't have to sit through an entire thing to get your quick opinion.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of a numerical review because it's too vague. You can't take an opinion. Opinions tend to be fairly complicated,
Yeah,
and to try to condense that down to a single
a single
number
number,
is too much. And
it is. It kind of kills some of your thought and vagueness along the way.
I agree. Like you don't sometimes you don't necessarily want to sit through a whole review. Especially I find that more so in games that I know I'm already gonna get at some point. I might not
Yeah.
necessarily be getting it right now, but I'm planning on getting it sometime down the road. Like let's just use Xenoblade Chronicles as an example.
Okay.
I don't necessarily want to sit through a whole review because I like going into things
With a little
relative,
bit of yeah.
yeah, like relatively to just discover it on my own.
Yeah.
But I do kind of want to understand a general consensus about the game.
Yeah.
But I think that's what a good summary paragraph should do at the end.
A good summary or some other kind of system in place where it's not just a number, but it's still just a quick kind of here's my main points.
Yeah, well, yeah, because that's supposed to be the entire point of a concluding paragraph is to take
Hmm.
your argument and restate it in a concise way.
Yeah.
And I think like more of those basically TLDR type mini reviews within the review, whether it be a TLDR up front, here's the cut and dry.
And then have the rest of the review explain necessarily why you think that.
Yeah, and then go into more details.
Okay.
Because the other thing with numbers is they create just really weird inconsistencies, especially the longer you go.
Yeah.
I mean, for starters, we all know those reviews where you listen or usually watch
Hmm.
the whole thing, and they sound either like they're really up on it, and then the final score is like a 6,
Yeah.
or they sound like they're really just hating the whole thing, and then the final score is like an 8.
Yeah.
You know
And
that
it feels weird. It feels like they just spent 20 minutes hating on this and then they give it some really good thing and you can't really know why.
Yeah, and again, I get it in the sense that I have written reviews where I look back on the review and I feel like in the review I was more critical than I necessarily feel. But
Hmm.
again, that's where I think that final paragraph can really be the place where you give,
Briefly explain it
yeah,
or justify it.
like I focus on the flaws, but I don't think that those flaws necessarily define the entire experience type
Okay.
thing. again, it just gives you more explanation than a single number.
It does.
But then there's also those weird incontinuities where, like, let's just say, for the sake of example, this isn't necessarily how I'd say it, but you get those reviews where it's like Persona 5 Royal improves on the original in every single way, 9 out of 10. And
Yeah.
it's like, what score was the original? 9 out of 10?
So then how is it any better if it's the same score?
Yeah, it's like you said it improves on the original in the same every way, but you gave it the same score. Is it because, you think that these improvements are just enough to justify the price of a new game, or
Or
it's
does
been
it
so
make
many
it better but
years,
not? Okay.
and that's where, like, you need opinions are complicated. You need that
Hmm.
entire review to
To
really,
explain it.
yeah, like, to really understand an opinion. And
But
sorry, go ahead.
no, I should say just sometimes you don't care about all the details. You just want a simple good or bad or worth it or not.
And again, I just keep coming back to that should be the summary. The final paragraph's job is to give you that concise information, because surely we can read a paragraph. Surely that's not asking too much.
Uh,
If you have, like, a genuine interest in whatever it is.
I mean, I want to agree with you, and on a personal level I do, but on a realistic level I don't.
I think
I
people are
don't want
too
to.
lazy.
Yes, yes I do, because I've been too lazy before for things that I don't really kind of care about, but I'm just vaguely curious-ish. There's a 10-page review, fuck all that. There's a paragraph, fuck all that. There's a single number at the bottom, that's all I care about. And if there's not that number, then I'm just gonna say nope, too much, and keep going.
But I think those are the things that you really don't care enough about in the first place. Because
If
I
there was,
definitely do that, but I do that, like, okay, The Last of Us 2 came out recently.
yeah,
I don't give a single shit about that game. I have no intention of ever buying that game. So
okay,
yeah, I'll just, like, skip to the end review score just to see
what the opinion is.
what variant of 9 out of 10 they gave it. But I have no interest in the game. I have no interest in, like, I wouldn't have even bothered with the review if there wasn't a score, but I also wouldn't consider that a loss.
Yeah,
I mean, on the flip side,
there's a
I,
point. You went to it because it had the number. So at some point, there's some value in that short of an answer.
well, there's value in it in that it's easy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's 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 just it. That's the whole entire net value.
And sometimes you just want it to be that easy. And you don't want it, even a paragraph is more work than that.
But I just feel like we're too reliant on the number, and it tends to degrade discussion when everything
Boils
tends to,
down to just a number.
yeah, like, 8 out of 10, whatever. Eh,
Hmm.
like,
You're right.
I mean, you see that a lot where people just look at the net, and it's a broader problem than just blaming reviewers for having numbers, because you give something a bad score, let's just say, and then that
Okay.
gets tossed into Metacritic, and then that
Yeah.
affects the Metacritic score, which a lot of people go to and use as an end all, even though much like Rotten Tomatoes, it's an aggregator. You're not supposed to just
Mm.
use that number on its own. It's a very contextual thing, and people get mad at you because the Metacritic score affects the sales, and it does,
It does.
because people just tend to look at that number,
Yeah.
and it can affect other things like bonuses. Like, we all know the New Vegas debacle. Are you aware of this?
No, I am not aware of this.
Basically, Bethesda promised bonuses to all the staff at Obsidian if New Vegas got a Metacritic score of 85 or above.
Okay.
Bethesda was also the ones that forced them to rush the game out before it was ready.
Yeah.
They basically came to him and said, "You're shipping in like a month or whatever."
Hmm.
So the game ended up getting an 84 on Metacritic, with the single biggest consistent complaint being that the game was buggy.
Yeah.
So they didn't get their bonuses, and from what I understand in video game development, that's the difference between, that's where you make the bulk of your income as like a base level programmer.
And they missed out on all that because they were forced to send the game out early.
Yeah, and by 1 point.
Yeah.
But that their entire bonus was reliant on a number,
Hmm.
and that's where, if you're a reviewer trying to assign a number, aware of the fact that of how much rides on these,
Yeah.
do you go with your gut and give it more what you think it deserves, or do you go with what you think is going to either appease your fan base, because a lot of sites like IGN and journalist sites, not really a lot of them, all of them make their income through ad revenue.
So they've got to put whatever the people kind of want to hear a little bit to keep people coming in.
Yeah, so
If they say something too far off from what's expected, then they
then
get a little bit of hate for it.
yeah, and it's not a problem that you can necessarily attribute to just using a numerical scoring system, but it's definitely a side effect of trying to simplify things to that extreme,
Hmm.
because it all becomes a numbers game
Yeah.
at the end of the day, and I, do they do more harm than good?
Yeah.
And again, this is where
The idea of a number itself, I don't think it does, but I think it's the reliance on just the number and not everything else that I think causes some of the problem.
and I agree, but this is the line between the sort of ideal and the real, where the number
Hmm.
shouldn't be the problem, but when the number is the problem, what is your responsibility as somebody who is aware of that problem to take steps to address it?
Yeah.
And I think that's where uh, this sort of grounds for debate continues. Obviously,
Makes
there's
sense.
no easy answer. If there was an easy answer, they'd either all be gone or all be present. Well, I guess the easy answer is to just keep doing what you're doing.
It's definitely the easiest option.
But I've just been thinking of maybe trying to do a review on our channel, and
Okay.
I just know that I would not
Put a number on
use,
it.
yeah, I just wouldn't use numerics, because I think it's too hard. Like, let's take something like Cold Steel.
Okay.
If you had to assign a number to Cold Steel, what would you give it?
Uh, I really liked it, so I'm gonna go really high. Say something, I don't know, like 9-ish would be my just first go-to.
And that's where I'm kind of conflicted, because I do like the game so much, but when you start looking at the flaws, start looking at it from a perspective outside of your own,
Hmm. No, there
it
are issues,
they
but
become more apparent, and then that becomes, you know, that affects the final score, but it can affect it in a way that, okay, here's another example of the point I'm very badly trying to make.
okay.
Um, 3 out of 5.
Yeah.
Uh, the movie
Is
Under the Silver Lake.
God, I hated that.
Well, that's perfect, because it plays into what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Uh, it has, last I checked, a 3 out of 5 on Amazon.
Okay.
So you'd think, oh, this is like an average movie, middle of the road movie, right?
You would think.
But actually, if you look at the review score breakdown, there almost every review is either 5 stars or 1 star.
I believe that.
So it's not,
And it averages out to a 3 even though it's not a 3 movie. It's either a 1 or a 5 movie.
yeah, you either love it or hate it. There is very little middle ground.
Yeah.
You hated that movie, I adore that movie, and that's just, it's a perfect example of, it's not,
Of what happens when you average out numbers and it's not
yeah,
a good example of what it is.
yeah, it's not an average movie, and that's where I think sometimes falling back on numbers ends up being problematic, because I look at something like Cold Steel and it's like, okay, I really liked it, but if I take into account a lot of its problems, I probably give it something like an 8 out of 10. But
Okay.
the problem with 8 out of 10 is it's very, very comfortable, because I can look at something else that I'd give an 8 out of 10, but for entirely different reasons that I would give Cold Steel an 8 out of 10. And
Mhm.
if I were to put the two side by side, they wouldn't even really like
Yeah.
compare, even though
But
they're
they still.
both Jerpagas.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of an example, but it's difficult because I'm so tired. It's when you start getting into the higher tiers, I think, that it starts getting harder. But you understand what I'm saying, essentially. It's too simplified, and sometimes that can lead to
Confusing.
misunderstanding or misrepresenting why you feel
Exactly
the way
what
you
it
do.
is. Okay.
I don't think I could give Tokyo Xanadu a score.
I get that.
Like my opinions on the game in terms of what it does wrong, what it does right, what it needs to improve on, but more importantly, when you should play it. And that sounds like such a weird thing, but let's be honest.
It's a game you need to be in the right set for.
Well, it's not a game that I would necessarily advise somebody play as their main game if they're looking to be like, play some big game, but as like
Yeah.
a cleanser between things.
Hmm.
Like I played this big long game, whatever.
Now I want to take something short and kind of fun for a little bit until I get into the next big giant thing.
Yeah, just something short and dumb and straightforward. Great.
Yeah,
And
that's what it is.
that's where that becomes hard to assign a numeric value to, because shouldn't all games be
Equal.
able to stand on their own as, your primary point of interest, blah blah whatever.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, yes, but also no.
Yes, but no. No, there's yeah, they're different somehow.
And I mean, it's just a limitation. I mean, it's especially shitty when the quality of the review itself isn't great. But I'm
That's a
trying to
problem.
decide if this kind of goes into a new topic, because
Eh,
even the
a,
concept
li- a
of,
little bit it does, but
like, even the concept of what is a review is very ambiguous,
yeah.
because there's basically it's like a scale. There's two. I've noticed there's two types of reviews, but it's not like it's all one or all the other.
Yeah.
Typically, it can be, but usually it's somewhere in between.
Okay.
And that's the review in the sense of a recommendation, which
Okay.
is where you briefly touch on major points and then give a, would you, I recommend this or don't.
Yeah.
And then there's the more analysis type review, where you tend to talk to the game as if you're talking to somebody who has completed it.
Okay. And focus on like your criticisms and improvements and shit like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, you go more in depth into why things bothered you, or if a certain character bothered you, or certain
Make,
scenes or things like that. Like you tend to be more analytical of it,
makes sense.
like literally a review, as in a second viewing.
Okay.
of the thing. You tend to be, towards one or the other, and they make for very different.
They make for very different reviews or videos or articles or whatever.
Yeah, and that.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
you, I was just say to me, then back on the numbers thing, you can't really assign a number to the second one nearly as well as you can the first one. At least when I think about it, I think of the number as a how likely are you to enjoy this number?
And that again, comes back to there's no. I guess this is one that I is so obvious that I didn't even think to bring it up earlier, even though it is a major problem. There's no uniform idea or concept with numbers. There's
Yeah.
no uniform definition. There's no uniform meaning.
Hmm.
By which I mean, for starters, 5 out of 10 is not universal.
No.
You know,
Sometimes 5 out of 10 is average. Sometimes 5 out of 10 is god awful.
yeah. So from the start, there's that. But then there's also like what you just brought up. Like to me, a number is a recommendation,
Yeah.
more or less. But that's not how everybody thinks. And I've
Yeah.
definitely read reviews where the number tends to be incredibly critical because it's based really on the person's own expectation,
Okay.
and it's less a recommendation to you as a person and more a reflection of their frustrations with what they expected from this company. So it tends to fall more into that analytical side of things
Okay.
where they're not really thinking about other people as much as they are just
It's just
discussing their own experiences and measures.
just basically putting their own thoughts onto the page, and whatever comes of that happens.
Yeah, and it's just another hurdle that comes with numbers
Hmm.
because numbers are relative.
Yeah.
One only exists because two does. You know what I'm saying? If the concept of two did not, if the concept of any number outside of one didn't exist, you wouldn't have a concept of one.
I think you're trying too hard to make your point.
Well, it's true. I mean, it's like hot and cold. Do hot and cold exist unto themselves, or do they only exist relative to another thing? You see what I'm saying?
I see that you're trying too hard.
Well, it's not even trying too hard. It's just common sense.
Yes. Now relate that back to numbers in reviews.
That they're all relative. That there's no uniform concept of what a number inherently represents, even among like a reviewer from review to review. It just comes back to my concept of a seven and your concept of a seven aren't the same thing, but that's because
Yeah.
even the concept of a numerical value is relative. So when I arrive at the conclusion that something is a seven,
Yeah.
that seven is relative to, what is it relative to? A lot of the times when it's like a 10 out of 10. Let's take a 10 out of 10, for example.
Okay.
Is a 10 out of 10 a perfect game?
Ideally, supposed to be.
But no such thing exists.
Yeah.
So can nothing be a 10 out of 10? Or
I mean,
is a 10 out of 10 just an exemplar of that particular genre? Because otherwise, how do you compare, like, let's say you give, again, just using it as an example, Persona 5 a 10 out of 10,
okay.
and then you give Devil May Cry a 10 out of 10.
Okay.
Obviously, one 10 out of 10 had nothing to do with the other 10 out of 10 because these are completely separate games. The
Okay.
definitions for arriving at that numerical value are completely different because what defined the numerical value is completely relative to that specific review, even though at the end of the day, what they have are two uniform numbers that theoretically represent the same thing.
You are trying way too hard, making an obvious point, but you are trying way too hard to make your point.
I'm exhausted, so
I know. I can tell. Yes.
anyway.
Different numbers in different places are different things. Yes.
So yeah, I mean that's review scores in a nutshell,
I don't know.
half hour nutshell.
I'm just sitting here thinking I liked the thing that IGN used to do, which I just realized that they don't do anymore, which is kind of sad.
They just have like the plus and minuses at the end.
Well, where they used to, where they, they'd have the review, they'd have the number, and they'd have a list of these are my, three or four favorite things, and these are my three or four least favorite things.
Although
So
they,
to go along with the number, you have a super simple, super straightforward reasoning behind it.
although then you end up with stupid shit like too much water.
Maybe the game had too much water.
It was a meme from the third Pokemon remake, the Sapphire
Okay.
and Ruby remake. One
The
of the
ones that was
reviewers,
nothing but the ones that were just like nothing but islands everywhere. You
yeah,
had to sail between them all.
yeah, but that
See,
that's still a hilariously dumb
it's a dumb
complaint.
reason, but it's a dumb complaint, but
Here's the thing,
just but it's justifying their answer or their number. So
but,
I can
but we
I can
don't know
accept
that. Again, it's just we don't have the context. It's a dumb complaint with no context, and I don't know the context, which means you can just post it online, and that's what happened. It became a meme. Too much water.
it. You know,
But I don't know. Maybe the reviewer had some reason for bringing it up. I
yeah,
can't fathom
because there was too much water and not enough land, and
why why just.
they thought it was not fun because there was too much water and not enough land. That's a complaint. It's kind of a dumb one, but it's a complaint, and it's part of the reason they gave it their number. So
But again,
I
you're making that assumption.
I can get it's a yeah.
You don't know that that's why though. You're assuming that's why.
Yeah, well,
Now I have to look this up.
all right. Look it up. But still, the idea of quick justifications of your thoughts.
That's
I
why
like
I
that.
just tend to prefer a paragraph, because then you can at least usually justify why there's too much fucking water.
I'm sure in the review he explained what too much water means, and he
Oh,
probably
is it
had
is it
he
gone
probably
now? I don't see the plus in my. Was this IGN?
which you know what in the I don't give a fuck. Which Pokemon was it? It was
Uh,
Ruby and Sapphire.
yeah. I
All
just
right,
Yeah, I mean,
Pokemon.
here's the image.
Here we are. Do. Damn, that's a long ass review. Yeah, they got rid of the plus and minus system, and they took it off of their old reviews too.
That's
That's dumb.
hilarious that they took it off of their old reviews.
That is super dumb. Can't believe they would do that. That was like one of the things that I actually liked about IGN reviews is that they gave those quick little blips along with the numbers.
Okay, see here, this right here in the review
Okay.
actually puts some context onto that statement.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's not a new complaint, but Hoenn is still in balance type-wise, heavily favoring water. It's especially noticeable in Alpha Sapphire, in which Team Aqua use a lot of water types. It feels like there are water Pokemon in nearly every battle, and I have an overleveled Pikachu to show for it. You also have to navigate many bodies of water, since much of the late game involves surf and dive to get from place to place. Diving was neat back in 2002, but I found it incredibly tedious in Alpha and Omega, an obvious example of how superfluous from some HMs are. So with the context, there's too many
Too much
water.
water. Too
There's
much
not
water.
too much water though.
It is too much water. There's too much
There's
water and not enough not water.
there's too many. The I, the balance of Pokemon feels off.
because
Would be a
when
better
you
way to convey that than too much water.
there are definitely better ways to convey it, but too
Yes.
much water isn't wrong.
But with just too much water, you don't understand what they're saying.
Yeah, but we're keeping these little blips like 5 words or less.
Then it's ultimately useless because they don't understand the complaint. Nobody does.
Yeah,
It doesn't make sense as a complaint. Like too much water. What? I have that complaint in Minecraft from time to time.
yeah,
You know, you place a water block and all of a sudden it just floods everything because that game has weird water physics.
yeah. It does have weird water physics. But yeah,
Anyway,
too much water. Numbers not great. They serve a purpose, but there's probably a better way to do it.
and that's what 7.8 out of 10. Too much water.
7.8.
Yeah, that's what it got.
Which one are you reading? Because I'm looking at.
Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby.
Oh, okay. See, I've got just plain Ruby, and it got a 9.5,
Well,
which
yeah,
is weird.
no, it was the re-release
Yeah, I know yours is the re-release, but
that,
it's
that had
weird.
the too much water comment.
Yeah, it's weird that the re-release has a significantly lower store number than the original did.
And that, comes back to why.
Yeah,
I mean, I can think
why
of,
is it's like
I,
why is the re-release so much worse than the game that it's supposedly just improving on?
and I can think of several reasons, but without the review,
Hmm.
you don't get that.
Yep.
And that's all I'm saying is I don't think, I mean, the review scores aren't going anywhere anyway.
No,
So it's not like making this is going to magically make somebody, make IGN go,
maybe
maybe
we
we
shouldn't
should,
do this anymore.
yeah, maybe we'll just stop using review. No. But personally, if we ever put a review up for the site, page, channel, whatever, I don't care.
Whatever we are.
It will definitely not have a score. And this discussion goes into some of the reasons why.
Fun, fun.
So join us next week when hopefully I'm not so fucking exhausted.
Back to normal, and we do our old questions again.
Yeah, when we do set of it'll be five new questions. Well, three old questions and two new ones. So five questions.
All right.
Yay.